Hi everybody, this is Helen Sanderson. We're a few minutes away from getting started and we'll be introducing Jackie. Well, actually I'll ask her to introduce herself and explain why values are so important and how we've been exploring them in recruitment. It's brilliant to have so many people online with us. I don't know if you've been part of a webinar before, but I'll just give you an overview of some of the controls. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see a chat screen. So if you click on chat, that's where you can type messages that go to everybody. If you've got questions throughout the session, if you want to type them in there, I'll be paying attention to the question box and we'll be making notes of questions that we'll ask Jackie at the end. So please, as you've got questions, feel free to ask them and post them there. There's a display there that says you can raise your hand. Please don't feel that you need to raise your hand at all. Just post questions as you've got them and we'll come to them later. We are recording the session, but the text box won't be recorded, so please don't worry about that, but we're recording it so that we can share it with people afterwards, and we'll be sending that out to you as well as other colleagues afterwards. So we've just got a couple of more minutes to go, and then I'll ask Jackie to get us started. So Jackie, according to my watch, it's just coming up to 4 o'clock. So I wonder if you'd like to take over as presenter now and get us started. Please start by introducing yourself.
Thank you, Helen. It's tremendous to be with everybody this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for making the time to come along. My name is Jackie Lefebvre. I run my own company called Magma Effect, but I also have the honour and privilege of being one of the directors of the Monescence International Cooperative, which specialises in unfolding meaning through values and enabling people to live a more values-conscious life. So that's why I'm here today. So I do have a bit of a plan here. Let me share with you my plan. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and how I became involved in this field. I'm going to explain how values function, because they do some very, very specific things. Work up a definition of values that makes sense and we can do something with. Describe some of my first-hand experiences of values in recruitment and touch upon some of the relevant theory, and then suggest some things you might like to try if values in recruitment feels like the kind of thing that appeals to you. So, for most of my life, I have mystified my mother. This went from filling up a pram with earthworms because I thought dolls were boring when I was 6, right through developing a taste for heavy metal music, particularly Def Leppard. There's a bit of a zoological theme coming in here, you may notice. I went to university, I studied zoology. I was particularly interested in behavioural ecology, which is looking at organisms in their environment. So animals live somewhere, they could do A, they could do B. So why do they do the one that they choose? So I've always been interested in behaviour. This led me ultimately to deciding to go and volunteer in West Africa, looking after a project which was reintroducing chimpanzees to the wild. So I would say to people in a very excited voice, I'm going to go and live on the banks of a tropical river in a mud hut where there's no telephones or anything else, and it's going to be so exciting. And they would say, you're going to do what? And I'd say, I'm going to live in a mud hut. And they'd say, yeah, we heard what you're going to do, but why? Why would you do something like that? And the answer was that actually I was inspired. I didn't know it at the time, but what was happening for me was that the values that I held as an individual aligned very, very strongly with doing a particular kind of work under particular circumstances. And that really has carried through all of my professional work. Why do people do what they do when they do it, given the circumstances in which they find themselves? Now, it is a jungle out there, but our jungle today is more concrete than it is leafy. The wiring that we have, though, as a human being is thousands of years old. It is still geared for being a member of a smallish community in an alien-threatening world where uncertainty is the only thing about which you can be certain. So our wiring, our operating system, if you like, is thousands of years old, and nobody sent us a software update. So we're still trying to work with something in modern environments that originated in a much more simple and much more fundamental kind of a place. So what does that then throw up for us? Well, it throws up the fact that values are active in all of the decisions that we take and the ways in which we feel about what goes on in our lives. That's particularly salient when you think about applying for work or advertising a job. Steve Jobs famously once said that actually the process of hiring top talent is the most important job anybody can do inside an organization. And it makes sense, really, when you think about it, because the people that you bring on tomorrow, next week, next month, very much are the future of your organization. So finding the people they're going to make that a thriving, exciting, vibrant future, not just for them, but for also the colleagues that they will be joining, is a really important thing to do. Now, here in the UK, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development is the big professional institute that is concerned with all things human resources. So recruitment, selection, performance management, learning and development, all of those sorts of things. And a couple of years ago now, it published a really interesting report, Ahead for Hiring. It looked at the behavioural science of recruitment and selection. It came up with 18 top tips, and its first one was take a fresh look at person-organisation fit, considering both current and aspirational organisational culture. This matters because it's about how we slot into an organisation, because if we can't slot in, we can't then contribute. If we don't feel like we belong, we can't contribute. What is person-organisation fit? Well, you've got a definition there from two of the main researchers in this field, Cable and Judge, and they say it's about how well a person's perceptions of the values held by a company map onto the values that the person themselves hold. This is critical, the person's perceptions of the values held by a company. So that's not what the company thinks it has as its core values, but it's what the potential recruit thinks it has, expects it to have, by virtue of how it writes its adverts, how it conducts its recruitment process. So if it matters that much what's going on with values, we really need to take a look at values and where they fit in the grand scheme of things. So this is work by a theorist called Glasser, and he looks at choice architecture. And he says that what we see of individuals and what we see of organizations is only the tip of the iceberg. What we see is the stuff above the water, the visible stuff. We see actions and attitude, those two things that make up behavior. We see what is done and how it is done. And if you think about that for a moment, if you think, okay, you can walk into the reception of one company and walk into the reception of another company and you will get a completely different feel. In one reception, you may be greeted by a receptionist who looks up from typing away busily with their headset on their head and says, "Good afternoon, can I help you? Who are you here to see?" You say, "I'm here to see Bob, he's on the 3rd floor." She says, "Excellent, take a seat, I will phone him." And that's it. That is the extent, it's the full extent of your interaction. It's very efficient. You go into another reception and you walk in and the receptionist says, "Hello, nice to see you. Have you been to our building before? Who are you here to see?" "Bob on the 3rd floor." "Right, let me just give him a bell. There's a water cooler in the corner if you need a drink, and please do help yourself. And the ladies and gents are just round the back to the right, if you want to pop in there at all before he comes down. If you want to take a seat though, I'll give you a shout as soon as he's ready." Feels very different. It's very courteous. It's very warm. So depending on what the culture values inside the organisation, it will drive different ways of doing the things that need to be done. And it's the ways of doing that then give a feel to the organisation. And those values are springing from beliefs, things about which the organisation is highly certain. So there's a really interesting dynamic going on here. One of the things that I do with conference audiences that entertains me terribly is ask them if they value their health. Put your hand up if you value your health. Hands will go up all over the room. And you say, this is fantastic. This is truly marvellous. To be in the presence of such enlightened and erudite people in 2017 is a joy. So if it is true that you value your health, then we will see in your actions and attitudes things that prioritize health, that prioritize well-being, that make health and well-being more important than other things. So that should mean, and you can keep your hand up if this is true, that you eat a minimum of 5 portions of fresh fruit and vegetables every day. Ideally, you should be edging towards 10, according to the latest dietary advice. You're drinking at least 2 litres of water every day, which if you're in the UK at the moment in these high temperatures is really important. You are exercising aerobically for a minimum of 20 minutes 3 times a week. As you can probably imagine, hands are going down all over the room now. You always eat breakfast, you've got good sleep hygiene, and so on and so on and so on, because there's so much that we can do to maximise our health. You get home on a Friday night, and instead of reaching for a second glass or second bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, you go out for a walk in order to relax and unwind, ready to go to bed. So there's a lot of things you can do. Now, we think we value our health. We prefer to be healthy. Who wouldn't? But we don't prioritise it. Something is only a value if we prefer and prioritise it consistently above other things. And underneath those values, which have to do with enjoying ourselves or beating the traffic or whatever it happens to be, there are sneaky beliefs associated with our health, like there's still time. I'll get fit next year. Those sorts of things. So there's a real dynamic going on across this iceberg. The wrinkle for us, whether we're working at an organizational level or just looking at ourselves as individuals, is that these values and these beliefs are coded up in our unconscious mind. They're part of the limbic system, which is quite an ancient brain structure, and it has no vocabulary. So it doesn't think, it feels. This is a really important point. Values are energy-laden and emotionally rich ideas. They are closely interwoven with our sense of self. So what that means is they kind of act like the neck of an hourglass. If you imagine one of those egg timer things that has sand that runs through and counts the time, information filters in to us, and then we need to make sense of it. And once we've made sense of it, we then push out our response to the information that has come in. So values are closely interwoven with our sense of self, which is how come they're all part and parcel of us thinking, I'm a person who could do a job like that. A job like that is right for a person like me. So it's very much about personal connection. Values are not, though, beliefs, ethics, or morals. So beliefs we've looked at, these are things about which we're highly certain. If you like, they are the truths of our model of the world. And based on those truths, there are things that we believe to be right or wrong. There are things that we judge to be right or wrong, and that is our moral sense. What is right, what's wrong, what's in, what's out. And then ethics is a code, an agreed and externalized code that draws on the morals and says how we shall work, how we shall act, how we shall decide. But none of those things are values. Values infuses and shows up in this stuff, but none of this is values. And it's really important to be specific. Otherwise, we can get in a right old muddle when we're talking about recruitment and what it is that we're looking for. So, I mentioned a filter. This is the filter. It is a natural structure. It's called our reticular activating system, or ascending reticular activating system. I'm going to indulge myself in a little bit of evolutionary zoology here. When our ancestors first went up into the trees and started clambering about up there, we developed really, really good vision. Our eyes moved round to the front of our head so we could be binocular and we could judge distance, and we got colour vision. Colour vision is very exciting because it gives you lots and lots of detail, and you can make better judgments about where you need to go. So if you're in the top of the tree and it's early morning and you feel really hungry, then what you need to be able to do when you look out over that forest landscape is spot fruit trees. Out of this sea of green, something that's a fruit tree needs to kind of pop for you. It needs to stand out. So the reticular activating system filters out all trees that are not fruit. At night time, looking for somewhere to nest, something nice and dense and something that's going to protect you from the rain, you need to see over and above anything else trees that are good for nesting in. The thing is, we still have this structure, all of us. We all have a reticular activating system. So we don't see everything. We don't hear everything. We only see and hear things that have meaning for us. For something to have meaning for a person like us, it has to align with our priority values. Our priority values determine what's worth paying attention to and what is not worth paying attention to. So I could sit, you could sit, literally with a page of job adverts and scan over them, and one or two would kind of pop. One or two would make you kind of go, oh, you'd lean in. You'd think, no, that looks interesting. A person like me could do something like that. 2 minutes later, somebody looks over your shoulder and goes, oh, that's really interesting. And then you go, I know, look at this. It's with the National Trust and it's environmental education and it's really, really, no, they say, not that one, the one at the top. Which one at the top? That one at the top, that one at the top, working for the Home Office. See all of those duties, you could do all of those. I would have completely not seen it, because the language in it didn't resonate with my personal values. Literally in that moment have been blind to it. So you need to be thinking in terms of values in recruitment. You really need to be thinking about the characteristics of the people you're trying to attract to do the job, because you need to be talking in language, in stories, in metaphor, in descriptive terms that resonate with the high priority values that they are likely to have, because otherwise they literally won't see it. Not because they're trying to ignore you and not because they don't want to know, but because it literally doesn't get through the filter. This is a really powerful structure. If you think, what I say to people is, if you think about maybe the last time you decided to change your car, and maybe you thought to yourself, well, quite fancy a Mazda, don't see many of them, not many people around my place drive Mazdas, but they got low recall rates, so I could fancy one of them. And the next time you go to a car park, the next time you're driving out on a big road, it'll feel like every other car is a Mazda. They were there the whole time, you never saw them because they had no meaning until you decided that they were relevant to a person like you. They didn't get through the filter. So that's how it works. So this makes sense then when we get to the CIPD's top tip number 2. And number 2 says, test the wording of your job adverts to see how it affects who applies. So I had a little look on The Guardian online yesterday, and I went for hospitality jobs. And here are the first lines of 2 jobs that were advertised yesterday. Very different. The first one says, oh yes, this is one hot opportunity for a professional who's cool as the proverbial cucumber when the pressure's on, complete with exclamation mark. And then there is an events assistant required to provide administrative support to the events and conferences team, particularly in preparation for our annual conference. The thing is, this is all you get unless you click for more. And in these modern technology days, we're actually quite resistant to do clicking. We want to just find a thing. We want it at a top level. So if you think about this, these 2 jobs are going to appeal to very, very different people. What I thought was very interesting when I went to the next level for these is that the first one is for a kitchen manager, which is great. The second one is for an events assistant, as it suggests, in a large organisation, large NHS organisation, and it goes on to say specifically that they are looking for an enthusiastic self-starter. Nowhere in that first sentence do we get any feeling that this is something about which somebody needs to be able to demonstrate enthusiasm or take the initiative. It sounds very directed. So the thing needs to add up. When you start at the beginning and then work through to the end, it's got to add up. So one of the things that I've been lucky enough to work on with Helen and her team is the advertising for wellbeing team workers. So in this, we're looking to attract people who want to get into care, absolutely, but more so than that, actually have got an interest in whole people, not just service users, but people, warts and all, with all of their passions and interests and anxieties. We also are looking for people who have a curiosity about life and a passion for learning. And that comes from a deep belief underneath all of this that actually great people have got great potential, and to expand on that potential and develop that potential, you need to be open. You need to be open to new experiences, and you need to be open to new learning. So those are the kinds of things that we've had very, very high up. But we actually open the whole thing with beliefs. We open the recruitment advertising with, we believe that loneliness should not be an inevitable consequence of getting older. That's very powerful. And fundamentally, anybody who did not also believe that, who could not align with that and put their hand on their heart and say, it is true that loneliness should not be inevitable. There is no world in which inevitable loneliness is a good thing. If they don't feel like that, then their scope to do the job in the way that the job needs to be done, not to execute the tasks. Lots of people can execute the tasks. That's not really the question. The question is, who will come and do this the way that we feel it needs to be done to dignify both the cared for and the carer? So you need to be thinking about the beliefs. All organisations have beliefs. Not very many of them get around to figuring out what they are and putting them on a bit of paper so that they can be used. So make things concrete. This then makes it, to me, very sensible when the CIPD carries on in its report and says, how to start? You have to clarify explicitly what characteristics are most critical for your organisation's culture. What do these people need to believe? Because they need to believe, they need to accept your truth as a truth that is viable, that a truth that is evident in their world. Based on those beliefs, there needs to be things that they can align with valuing. Now, I keep using this word alignment. It's not about mini-me's. It's not about trying to find clones. In fact, it's the very opposite. Because you can have the same behavior, if you remember that iceberg, you can have the same attitudes and actions that arise from different values roots, provided that they share an underpinning belief. So, for example, I might have the value of sharing, listening, trust, and then you will see me behave in a way that is empathetic, promotes connection, is experienced as trustworthy, and therefore is trusted. You might get that behavior from that value. It's pretty likely. Equally, I might have a value of efficiency, but you'll see me behave in exactly the same way. And that could be because I know from my personal experience or from research that I have read, whatever it happens to be, I accept as a truth, I believe that efficiency is really important because I don't want to waste anything, and the most efficient way to work is to trust and be trusted. because there is very, very good evidence that shows that where trust is low, the cost of transactions goes up by up to 13 times. Because where trust is low, there is double checking and triple checking, and there is second guessing, and there is exhaustive monitoring, and the kind of audit that makes you want to curl up your toes and just abdicate from everything, basically. So trust, really interesting. I see trust a lot in terms of organizations as a desirable characteristic. It can be driven by a number of different values routes. So that's why it's a question of alignment. It's not a question of matching. So explicitly state what characteristics are most critical for your organization's culture. Culture is a mixture of the beliefs, of the values, and of the accepted ways of doing things, customary practice. It's more than just how we do things around here. It is also the why we do things like that around here and where we got all of those ideas from. So if you want to do that, I say stop. Just stop for a moment and think about the people of your place. Think about the people in your organization and what they're like at their best. If you don't have a set of core values, if you haven't got a stated organizational purpose, if you haven't got any of these kind of nuts and bolts that we wrap around this, you can still get into values-based recruitment by being more conscious of the language that you use. So stop and reflect upon what the people of your place are like at their best. So whatever those characteristics are, surely that's what you want more of. And whatever those characteristics are, they are true of the culture. So you can start to couch your advert, you can start to look at your job description, you can look at the person's specification about how it brings that to life. And I say be brave. Incorporate appropriate emotionally rich language into your advertising. That job description and person spec has to give people a feel. Why does feeling matter? Feeling is huge. We do so much of our processing through what we feel. There's a really interesting experiment done by some guys back in 2010 where they were looking at how recruiters go about appraising CVs. So they got two identical piles of CVs applying for a job, same job. And they gave one set of CVs to one set of people and another set of CVs to another set of people. The difference in how appropriate for the post and how strong the recruiters felt the candidates were was stark. One group said they were great, and the other group said they were, well, you know, they were all right. They got a pulse. We could do something with them, probably, at a push. And the only difference in the experimental conditions was that the people who loved the candidates had been given the CVs on a high quality heavyweight clipboard. The people who didn't like the candidates had got them on a floppy bit of cardboard that went everywhere. This I think is fascinating, and it's actually an effect called effect labeled attribute substitution. Like the psychology for it, but it's one of the things we do. We take on board all kinds of strange pieces of information as part of the overall picture. You will know it yourself. You will pick up two pieces of paper. One will feel nice and one will not. And you are likely to attend more to the stuff on the nice piece of paper than the unnice piece of paper. So you need to think about the feel. Really need to think about the feel that the job description is giving, the feel that the advert is giving, and give people something to latch on to, something to feel about. So don't be afraid of descriptive words. My final point is, though, be honest. If your organisation is wacky, off the wall, left field, little bit of this, little bit of that, making up as we go along, whoa, we fly by the seat of our pants, but boy, do we have a good time. If that's true, then say so. Because there will be certain people out there who are looking for that. If your organisation is faithful to its developed and tested methods of working, reluctant and resistant to change on a whim, then say so. because there will be people out there who have values around tradition and loyalty and design pattern order and things like that, who will read that advert and go, oh, fantastic, finally, somewhere I can belong. When you advertise, you are not looking for everybody. If you get lots and lots of applicants, it's actually potentially going to create a lot of work that will not improve your result. You are looking for people who want to come and who stand a good chance of fitting and contributing when they do come. And you need to make the whole thing add up. So whatever you say in the advert and however you couch the job description, it then needs to show up in the recruitment experience. So if you say you're wacky and off the wall, then you need to jolly well find some wacky and off the wall way of doing your selection, undertaking your interviews or your assessment centres or whatever it happens to be. It needs to fit. We're quite generous as human beings. We also are quite loyal to our first impressions. So if the advert gives me a first impression that this is a really bouncy, really kind of exciting, really avant-garde, really progressive kind of an organisation, and then I get invited to interview and I go in and it's really formal and it's all straightforward and it's exactly what you'd expect, I'm likely to give it the benefit of the doubt. Because I, by this stage, am emotionally invested in the job that I think I have applied for. Because I've gone through a self-referencing process of patterning my values onto it and imagining, tasting, thinking, feeling, sensing what it's going to be like if I'm lucky enough to get that job and how amazing it will be. I'm now in love with that idea. So I will go through a formal process and kind of go, oh, well, we have to standardize things sometimes, don't you? I can ad hoc rationalize that. That's not a problem. If I then arrive, I'm lucky enough to be offered the job, and I then arrive for induction, and it's really straight-laced too, now I'm going to start to worry. But I may still, be so invested in my idea of the job that I will carry on. And it may not be until a month later or 3 months later or a year later that I finally put my hands up and go, do you know what? This is so not what I thought it was going to be. I'm going to have to go. If you think about what's been wasted in terms of time alone, never mind the advertising costs and all those other things, time alone, finding the wrong person because the impression that was created with the recruitment advertising did not then fit the selection process and the induction, then you start to see why it's not a good idea. And this is what happens a lot inside organisations. One department will write the advert, the job description will have come from whoever's going to do the employing, the panel will be a mixture of people who are doing the direct employing and are maybe experts in recruitment and selection, and everybody will have a little bit of a say about how it goes on and who does what, and then you arrive and all of a sudden there's induction, and maybe it's done by your manager, but maybe it isn't, maybe it's done by the HR people or whatever, and you can see how the scope for it to just unravel for the candidate is massive. So be honest in the descriptions. Be honest. That's the most powerful thing that you can do. So I'm conscious we have now had half an hour, so I'm going to go through some final things that I suggest, and then if anybody has any questions, Helen will let you know the time to type it all in. So my top tips are: be clear about the true values that are core to the organisation. And if you don't know, then try not to make it up and fudge it. Try to then go with your intuition about your people at their best and what best looks like. Stay in that space if you don't actually know what the true values are. Write adverts and job descriptions that allow those values to shine through. And engage candidates in reflecting upon their own values to respond to questions in the selection process. I was doing this with a client of mine the other day, and they have a value of collaborate, and by collaborate what they mean is not just participating for the sake of rewards. So not just sitting around a table because you think you'll get a bit of credit, not just sitting around a table because you think you might get a bit of funding, not just sitting around the table because you think it might get you promotion. Collaboration is about a generosity of spirit in their place. So they have a question in their interview process that simply says, tell us about a time that you collaborated and what was most important to you. That's the kind of question that encourages the candidate to reflect upon their own values. And because the organisation knows what it means by collaborate, it can then listen to the answer and say, that's a really good fit for us. That's not our kind of collaboration. So you can still bring a level of objectivity to scoring those responses, but engage the candidates in reflecting upon their values in how they answer the questions in your selection process. And then finally, seek, respond to, and use feedback from the candidates about how the process felt to them. Because you won't know whether or not the way in which you've portrayed the job and then structured your process was all coherent unless you ask the people that went through it. There's a lot of learning to be had from this. And what's the point of all of this at the end of the day, of having a consciously values-based workforce, a consciously values-aligned workforce? Well, it's that number that's over in the cloud, 17%. Research has found that when people are clear about their personal values and are able to live their personal values in the work that they do, their performance is on average 17% better than other people who are not engaged. If you then can go to the gold standard and be clear about your organization's values, and the people who work for you are not only aligned with their personal values, but also the values of the organization, that then goes up to 19% increase in performance. So people say to me frequently, as I think you can probably imagine, values, that's all soft stuff. That's all just like emotional kind of fuzziness. It's emotional, yes, but it's not fuzzy and it's not soft. This is hard stuff. This is stuff that produces return on investment. This is stuff that requires us to think about who we are as people, how our organisation wants to be seen and portrayed and experienced, who it thinks it is, bearing in mind that it is only a collection of people, and using that to be honest with our candidates, with our customers, with our stakeholders, and use that as the basis for relationships. And it's powerful stuff. So my final slide is do keep in touch if you found this interesting, and I hope you have. Then you can follow me on Twitter, you can have a look at the website, send me an invitation on LinkedIn, whatever you want to do. That would be great. But this is the thing, and this is, ancient Greek wisdom. In the arena of human life, the honours and rewards fall to those who show their good qualities in action. Even then, Aristotle was recommending values-based activity to us. So thank you very much indeed for listening. I'm going to pass over to Helen and say, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Jackie. That was absolutely fascinating. Now, there are a couple of questions. The first one is, how do you make the link from values in recruitment to values in induction?
Okay, so you've got your values happening in recruitment. That's fantastic. So I'm going to assume that if that's happening, you know what they are. So you know what those behaviours are driven by. So when you get to induction, it's about thinking about that. So, for example, innocent drinks has got some really funky values, as you would probably imagine, but he's got one that's very much about connection, very much about the fact that we're kind of all in this together, that we are one big team. So one of the things that Innocent Drinks does is, for the first 3 weeks of a new job, the new recruit is taken to lunch by a different person from across the company every single day. So by the end of 3 weeks, they have had lunch with 15 different people who are not part of their department. So in less than a month, they have their own personal network of contacts. So you need to think about what that value means in practice. So if you have a value around learning, then within induction, you need to be thinking about how you're going to operate that so that the person doesn't just become orientated to their job, but actually also gets introduced to something new, a new skill or a new piece of information or a new kind of insight that they haven't had before. So how are you going to be with that person to enable them to grow during that period? So you look at the values you've used in recruitment, and then you say to yourself, what drives that? So what that value, it says this, what does it mean in practice? What comes out the top of the iceberg? What are the actions and attitudes that there need to be if for this to be experienced as lived? You need to know what it means and then make it happen.
Thank you, and that relates to the next question. Is lots of organisations have their values created at the top of the organisation and then cascaded down, and there might be roadshows or different ways of sharing these values with the organisation. That doesn't really resonate with the way that you've just described this. So if an organisation is serious about connecting with its own values in a different way, not just its aspirational values, but its actual values, how would you recommend they get started?
The good news is there is no one right way of doing this, so that's good. There are some ways that are better than others. It's not always misguided to have the top team articulate the values, because if the top team still involves founders, and if the top team involves people who have worked their way up, and had those genuine formative experiences, there is a good chance that the top team does have insight into what the values are. In terms of how then to bring the values to life, that is the thing that they can't know, because they can't know what it's like for each of the members of staff in all of the different roles. So there, the road shows or the conversations or whatever it is that's going on need to be focused on not telling people what the values mean, but in saying to people, here's how the values are described, how can you use them, what do you recognize, what resonates for you, what does this mean? So if we say we are, let me think of a quick example, if we say we are kind, say kindness comes out as a value, compassion comes out as a value, and the finance team says, compassion, finance, you've got to be kidding. It may be then for a facilitator to sit with them and say, okay, well, what do we do? What is our payment schedule? And they, oh, well, we always pay on time. Okay, well, that's kind, because lots of people don't. And when people don't pay on time, it causes small providers real stress, real headache. Cash flow is king for small business. Oh, well, yeah, well, if you look at the small people, we always pay them early. Provided we've got cash in the bank, we pay them early. Well, do you know what? That's kind. That's compassionate. So a lot of people will be doing things naturally, but because they haven't been engaged in reflection, they won't be able to put their finger on it and describe it. So that's one thing. It's not necessarily bad if it's come from the top team. There are other ways of doing it, though. I mentioned earlier about an organisation at its best. When an organisation is at its best, when its people are at their best, this is kind of a proxy for their highest priority vision values, because this is when we are at our most creative, our most generous, our most magnetic. So those stories, if you analyse those stories carefully, and there's technology for doing that, but you can analyse the stories and find out what's underneath it, what the heart of that is. I've just done an exercise with a global company. It's got people in 8 different countries around the world, so not possible to get everybody together for a big conversation. And we've gathered narrative from people, stuck it through this tool that we've got, and we've looked at why do people stay? Because they're all bright, capable, could work somewhere else. So why do they stay? And then us at our best. We tell us a story of a good day or a great achievement or something that just made your heart sing when you saw it happen. And we've also taken customer testimonials and analysed those as well. And what's really interesting for me is using the Monescence Values Framework, which has got 128 values in it. These 3 sets of 10 values that we've got out of these 3 data sets, there are 6 matching values across all 3 sets. So that's a phenomenal result. The probabilities are like off the scale that you would get something like that by chance. So you can interrogate what's most meaningful for people in the culture by storytelling. It's really, really great. Or you can identify those people who are, I've seen it done this way as well, identify those people who are regarded by their peers as the exemplars. There's often, somebody in a team or a couple of people in a team or somebody in supply or somebody in operations or someone in logistics, so people go, oh yeah, well, so when I think of, what are we like, who's a company man, who's a company woman, I always say it's Brenda, that's she's us, that's what we're all about. Get those again, so involve the workforce in identifying those people. Who are the people who really represent what's great about this place? Get them together in a room and get them talking about what matters most, how they make their decisions, how they work out if they could do A or could do B, which one is most like them as a member of this staff. Because those people know, they don't know it consciously, but they do know it, they embody it. So you can do that. There's lots of different ways, but most of them involve conversations.
Thank you. And one last question from somebody who's on the call. They've just changed their recruitment process and they now screen by telephone to get an idea about who the person is rather than just the CV. Would you recommend either going back to a first impressions of CVs or starting with a conversation with somebody?
Conversations give you a lot of different rich information compared to what a CV gives you. Over the telephone, you're missing quite a lot of information visually, body language, facial expression, all of those sorts of things. And it partly depends what you're recruiting them for. So if you're recruiting someone who's going to work in a call centre or has to do an awful lot of telephone work, then that's a valid way of forming a first impression, because that's how that person will be experienced by their customers or the service users. It's tricky because lots of people, I know a lot of people who are rubbish on the phone and utterly magnetic in person. So it really depends on what it is you're recruiting them for as to whether or not that's going to be a technique that works for you.
So that sounds really important, that you're matching the processes that you use with the values that you're seeking. So if you want to find people who are warm and friendly, how well they present themselves on paper, i.e. CV, might not be the first approach that you'd use.
No, it wouldn't. What the CV is going to tell you is whether or not they have had a life that in some way, shape or form is likely to have equipped them with the skills to come and do the job. But you don't hire for skills, you hire for attitude. You can train for skills.
Thank you. That's a great place to leave. So you're absolutely right. You can teach skills, but it's attitude and values are the key things to recruit to and recruit for. Thank you, Jackie. That's been fantastic. I've been tweeting throughout it as well, and I'm sure people really enjoyed it too. So thank you very much for giving up your time. As I said earlier, this session is being recorded and we'll send it out to everybody who attended. So again, thank you for your participation. Bye.